I really apologize, but my daughter's here and I have to get her to bed at a decent time. So, but I mean, I could listen all night to this, and I feel a little bit like we're in the panhandle of Texas and we just ate the 32-ounce steak, which means we get another one for free. We're very honored with our next speaker. We've heard a lot about how we got the whole space program going and what kind of effort it took and the importance of NASA in that. And our next speaker, I mean, we're not, he's a very familiar face to us here at Rice. Jim Bridenstine is the current NASA administrator and a long history of very important people to the nation, obviously to the space program. Jim is a triple major from Rice, so we're very proud of that. So it's a very Rice-themed evening, of course. He was a congressman from the 1st District of Oklahoma. And I have to get this right because I just traveled with some Army aviators, but he was a Navy aviator for several years. And rather than just read his resume and so on, I think one of the things that's impressed me, when obviously I don't follow Republican Congress issues in Oklahoma, but he always was a big fan and had a huge amount of passion for NASA. And so when his name get put forward to be nominated as the NASA administrator for the new administration following Charlie Bolden, there's a lot of concerns about people because a politician, and this is really science and engineering agency. I actually had no worries at all because of the speeches that he had done, because of the legislation that he had proposed. It's very clear that this person really loved NASA and would do what he could to make it continue to success. And having some political chops was not a bad thing. And I think he's lived up to that in the last couple of years that he's served as NASA administrator. And in particular, he's had a lot of pressure put on him. But he's living up to that, and I think we're about to hear some of the excitement of the future for NASA. So we've heard a bit about the past. There's a bunch of years in between that we'll hear at some other date, and we're going to hear about the future. So please join me in welcoming Jim Bridenstine.
Thank you, David Alexander, for that great introduction. Thank you for your leadership at the Rice Space Institute as well. What an amazing organization, and good for not just NASA, but for the country, and we're grateful for your service. Certainly, Douglas Brinkley, what an honor to share this stage with you. Yes, I understand you spend a lot of time traveling the country, speaking in the media, on the news. I've been watching you for years. You are an amazing ambassador for this place that I call home, Rice University. And I am always excited to watch you on TV and when you testify before the House. And I will tell you that this particular book, American Moonshot, has really reignited an enthusiasm for the space program that is significant, and again, born right here at Rice University. So thank you for all your leadership. It's an honor to be here with you. And of course, George Abbey is in our presence as well. For those who don't know, George Abbey is with the Rice Baker Institute, and he is Mr. Johnson Space Center, the former center director there at Johnson, who's done so many amazing things for so many years. And again, just like Douglas Brinkley said, it's a little daunting to stand in front of George Abbey and give a speech about, or not just Rice, but NASA. And but it's great for you to be here, George Abbey. So the reason we're all here, we are celebrating the anniversary of this speech that John F. Kennedy gave that transformed the way Americans think about themselves. It transformed really the future in a way that we can't imagine what it would have been without that speech and everything that followed from it. But one line in there in particular that gives me heartburn. And I think you guys know what I'm going to say. He said, "Some may say, why do we go to the moon? Why do we climb the highest mountain?" And then he said the line that gives me heartburn, "Why does Rice play Texas?" I will tell you why Rice plays Texas: because we win. And I was there the last time we did it. I was on the sidelines. It was a Sunday night, and it was a 1917 victory, 1994 against the University of Texas. And before I start talking about NASA, I want to read to you an article in the Houston Chronicle from 1994. Houston Chronicle. Let's see the date here. October 16th, 1994. Remember this, because we're talking about Saturday, and I'm going to be there. We're talking about what's going to happen on Saturday. This is the Houston Chronicle article. The world kept spinning. Cats still hated dogs. The rain continued to travel the direction that it always has, but Sunday night, Rice beat Texas. It gets better, and it continues about this amazing university we call Rice University. Tomorrow, the scholars on the other end of the campus take on the common cold. World peace is scheduled for Wednesday. Now anything is possible on South Main. Rice beat Texas. After 28 consecutive losses to the Longhorns, and by the way, that streak began after the Kennedy speech. Before that, Rice had a great record against Texas for 20 years. We were on top of Texas. The speech may very well have been the greatest thing for the United States of America and not the greatest thing for Rice University. After 28 consecutive losses to the Longhorns, and with their long rivalry taking its final steps towards extinction, remember this was the Southwest Conference about to end, the Owls pushed the Longhorns around for all of the world, or at least all of it wired into ESPN, all of the world to see. And when they finally danced about the artificial surface of Rice Stadium, the Owls had ended their long, frustrating streak with a 1917 win before 34,700 who sat through the rain for the right to be able to truthfully say someday they were there the night Rice beat Texas, something that had not happened since 1965. Now, of those 34,000 people, I am very pleased to tell you I was there. I was on the sidelines. I was holding the big dish so that you could hear the action on the field. Of those 34,000 fans, I would say about 33,000 of them were Texas fans, which makes me even more proud of what we're going to do this weekend. Saturday night, it's happened before, it can happen again, and this time I'm going to be there again, and maybe that will have some impact. All right, I got that out of my system. Now we can talk about some other stuff. So when we think about, here we are at the Baker Institute. This is a public policy think tank, and by the way, it's an amazing public policy think tank. A lot of great academic work comes out of this institution, a lot of great speeches from American leaders and world leaders all around the world. And one thing that I'd like to share that I think is important, and Professor Brinkley brought it up, in the era of the Apollo program, it was a contest between two great powers. It was a struggle. It was the United States of America against the Soviet Union. It was a contest of, and I'm gonna quote you directly, it was a contest of political ideology, economic ideology. It was a contest of technological prowess, and that really is what drove it. Earlier, the question came up, if he would not have died, would we have pushed forward as hard as we did? And I will tell you, the reason we were able to achieve what we did in 1969 is maybe not so much about making sure we live up to the legacy. It was about the intelligence that came after Apollo 6. The intelligence that came out, and Apollo 6 was a disaster for NASA. It's not recorded that way. We never declared it such. But when the Saturn rocket took off, and this was really the first time that the entire Saturn rocket took off, the second stage has 5 engines. 2 of them failed. So we barely made it to orbit. The upper stage, that single upper stage, the command module, if you will, that has only 1 engine, That engine, if you're going to the moon, it has to relight over and over again for translunar injection, to change orbits at the moon, to inject at the moon, to change orbits at the moon, to come home. It has to fire over and over again. When it was in orbit around the Earth on Apollo 6 for testing, it failed to reignite even once. If that would have happened at the moon, it would have been game over. Our astronauts would have been done. And even though of course it didn't reignite, we had to test the heat shield. We could not get to the velocity necessary to test re-entry of the heat shield, and this was on Apollo 6. This is April. This is April of 1968. So all of these failures occur. We can't test the heat shield. April of 1960, they come home, or they bring the system home, and everybody seems to believe that, we're going to have to take some delays, take a lot of time. The next day, they got intelligence that by the end of 1968, Russia, the Soviet Union, I should say, I want to be clear, the Soviet Union, I got all these experts here, the Soviet Union was going to be at the moon, in orbit around the moon, doing what we call a free return trajectory around the moon with humans by the end of 1968. That is the catalyst that spawned so many activities at NASA, because as you said, President Kennedy didn't like to lose. His successors didn't like to lose. Lyndon Johnson didn't like to lose. This is really the intelligence that said, we're going to move forward and we're going to go fast. And instead of delaying, we decided to skip a few missions. We went straight to Apollo 8, which in my view is probably the most significant Apollo mission because it was the first time humans went around the moon. We dropped the lander. The lander was the piece that was taking too long to build. We dropped the lander. We decided we're going to go to the moon. And of course, they were architecting a way, how could it possibly be done that we would do a free return trajectory. And after doing some analysis, they decided not only can we do a free return trajectory, we can actually go to low lunar orbit. And by the way, in order to achieve this by the end of 1968 on Apollo 8, in order to achieve it, it had to be done on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve. Think about that for a second. If this fails with that single engine that before had failed, those astronauts would be stranded in orbit around the moon on Christmas Eve for the entire world to see. But again, because of this great power struggle, the nation decided that this is an important capability that we actually have to win. And so we went forward. And interestingly, on that Christmas Eve, 1968, when they broadcast, and this is what's great about the United States of America, we did everything transparently. People saw our successes, people saw our failures, everything was, and we took video cameras, and on that trip we were filming and broadcasting live on national television. And in 1968 on Christmas Eve, they broadcast a message for the entire world to hear. You mentioned earlier Charles Lindbergh, 1927, the Orteig Prize, and in that Orteig Prize, Charles Lindbergh, after he won it, he traveled the United States, 1927, before television. 1 out of every 4 people in the United States of America saw with their own eyes Charles Lindbergh because he traveled so much trying to normalize aviation, which is a great thing for our country. 1968, imagine this, 1968, Christmas Eve, in one broadcast that was minutes in length, 1 out of every 4 people on the planet either heard or saw that broadcast from the moon on Apollo 8, Christmas Eve, 1968. This is a public policy think tank. That's an amazing tool of national power. Think about where we were, the Iron Curtain. How do you communicate behind this thing that they call the Iron Curtain? Well, let's do something so stunning that the entire world has to tune in. That's what it was. You know, in national security, we talk about elements of national power. And there's one element of national power that everybody thinks about all the time, and that's military. It's the big M, it's capital M, it's bold, everybody sees it and knows it. But there's other elements of power that are soft in nature, and I'm bringing all of this up because the Baker Institute is a public policy think tank. And when we think about the history that was made here, it was about averting war. not having the big M to win the war, although that's important for deterrence, critically important. But the question was this: how do we communicate behind the Iron Curtain? We talk about what we call the dime theory, diplomatic power, information power. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about 1 out of 4 people on the planet either hearing or seeing that broadcast on Christmas Eve, 1968. And that information power is what changes the perceptions of people all over the world towards the United States of America. Because they see this stunning achievement and they say, why aren't we doing that? Why can't we be with them? You know, one of the first big missions I did as the NASA administrator, I get to take credit for all the things that happened before me, but I was there just like Nixon was when we landed on the moon. I was there when we landed on Mars for the 8th time in human history with a robot, a little mission we call InSight. And it's helping us understand the interior of Mars. The United States of America is the only nation that's ever landed softly on Mars. Now we do it with international partners. But we've done it 8 times. Others have tried. Nobody has been successful yet. But we wish them luck. We really, as NASA, we want them to be successful. The more, the better. This is a science agency. We want to get more science and more information. We want to explore more of the solar system than ever before. My point is this, on the information piece, diplomatic power, information power. When we landed on Mars, it was a great day for NASA. I'm telling you, we were excited all across the agency. But we were on the cover of every newspaper worldwide when we landed InSight on Mars. A reminder of that information power that is unique to NASA. It's a reminder of that Apollo 8 mission in 1968 and how we had that information power. And even today, it's still stunning. People still want to see it. We were in a newspaper in Tehran. And by the way, the subtext of the newspaper says, the hardline newspaper of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. I don't know about you guys. Here at the Baker Institute, they're probably aware. They don't write nice things about the United States of America. But in this case, when it comes to NASA and this, once again, stunning achievement, they wrote an amazing article, and the last paragraph went line by line through who all of our international partners were on the mission. We had science instruments on there and technology on there from France and Germany. We have scientists in Spain and scientists in Poland that are going to be helping us, unravel the mysteries that we're going to find through this instrument. And that was all in this article. And there are children in Iran that are going to see that. And it's going to change their perception towards the United States of America in a positive way. NASA has this unique power. It is not a hard power. It is not military power. It is soft power. But it helps people understand that as humanity, we are all trying to do these stunning achievements, to learn more, to go further. And that helps shape the world so that we can have more peace and more security for the future. So we talk about these elements of power. After the Apollo program, and yes, there was a time when the United States government was arguing, should we partner with the Soviet Union or not? And of course, the decision was not to. The decision was to go and to win and not partner. But after Apollo, 6 missions, 12 people walking on the surface of the moon, after Apollo, we did partner with a program in 1975. In fact, it started long before that. In 1975, the United States of America had our astronauts, and the Soviet Union had their cosmonauts on orbit together in a space station in a program called the Apollo-Soyuz program. Or if you're in Russia, they would call it the Soyuz Apollo program. But either way, the partnership began. And after that partnership was successful, the next step was the shuttle program and the space station Mir, and collaborating to make those 2 elements work together. Not easy, but it happened, and it was successful. And even today now, for almost 20 years, we have had Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts living and working together in space for almost 20 years. This goes back to 1975. So what was a competition has now become a tool of American diplomacy. And NASA has uniquely delivered on this American diplomacy. Again, going back to the dime theory of national power, the first element is D, diplomatic power. Today, the United States of America, through NASA, we partner with 15 nations to operate the International Space Station. We've had astronauts from 18 nations on the International Space Station. We've had experiments from 103 different countries across the globe, experiments on the International Space Station. An amazing tool of diplomatic power and a transformation of how we go from this great power competition to an idea where we can all work together in space. And it opens a channel of communication for countries that often have terrestrial disputes and challenges. And there is no doubt that since 1975, quite frankly, we were in the height of the Cold War then, we were able to partner with the Soviet Union, and even today, terrestrially, we have disputes. But we have been successful at making sure that those disputes stay terrestrial in nature. And we have been able to live and work together in a space environment that is a very powerful tool for American diplomacy. So diplomacy, information, of course the big M is military. NASA doesn't play there, although as Professor Brinkley correctly identified, a lot of technologies serve both functions, national security and exploration. And you know, you talk about Alan Shepard, he launched on an ICBM rocket, so NASA benefits from national security technology as well. But of course, then the last tool, when you look at the dime theory, the last tool is economics. And in the United States of America, we are moving rapidly towards a day where we have commercial operations in space. And when we look at the future, what we're trying to do in low Earth orbit right now specifically, we are moving to a day where instead of the United States of America being the landlord in space on the International Space Station, we can move to a day where we are a tenant customer of a robust commercial marketplace for absolutely breakthrough technologies that are going to transform human life on Earth. I think there's two lines of effort that we are focused on. One is industrialized biomedicine. And of course, I know Rice University has a long history with space medicine. That could be a significant player here. But industrialized biomedicine. Right now, we are proving that it is possible to print in 3D human organs on the International Space Station in a microgravity environment that you cannot do on Earth. When you take human tissue and you use adult stem cells to try to create human tissue on Earth, it ends up just kind of going flat. But in a microgravity environment, it can take the shape that you want it to take without having to put all kinds of scaffolding in the tissue itself. And so that has amazing benefits, and once proven, could be a line of commercial activity for commercial habitation in low Earth orbit, commercial space stations, that would be transformational. And I know George Abbey has been a strong advocate for a lot of these commercial activities for a long period of time. But industrialized biomedicine is one. Another, of course, is and people are familiar with the material sciences. We talk about Z-bland as one technology. Fiber optics, in other words. We're talking about the ability to create very pristine fiber optics, so you don't have to have repeaters every mile or even less, and that drives down the cost for laying fiber optics, and that closes the business case. Of course, people are familiar with pharmaceuticals and immunization and these other things that we can do in a microgravity environment that we cannot do here on Earth. One of the most promising technologies that I've seen is retinal implants. We can layer capability, we can layer materials in a microgravity environment in a way you cannot do here on Earth that enables us to bring home retinal implants so that people with macular degeneration don't have to go blind. Once this is proven, you can imagine the market for it. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not there yet, but we're getting there. I think we're 3 to 7 years away from one major technological breakthrough that is going to ultimately transform space to be a commercial marketplace for human habitation, to do these missions with humans, where NASA, and we will always have a presence in low Earth orbit, I want to be clear, always. But we can be a tenant instead of the landlord, and that drives down our costs. We could be one customer of many customers in a robust commercial marketplace in low Earth orbit. Driving down, we could have numerous providers that are competing against each other on cost and innovation to enable us to do more in low Earth orbit than ever before. Right now, we have commercial resupply going back and forth to the International Space Station. We don't purchase, own, and operate the hardware anymore to resupply the ISS. We buy it as a service from a robust commercial launch industry for low Earth orbit. We're about to launch. Within the next year, we will once again, and I know it's been hard, especially for the Johnson Space Center, with the retirement of the space shuttle and the cancellation of Constellation, we have had this dry spell where America has not been launching its own astronauts on its own rockets. But I will tell you, within a year, we will be launching American astronauts on American rockets from American soil once again. And when that happens, we will not be doing it with government owning and operating. We will be buying the service from, again, a commercial marketplace that is competing on cost and innovation, driving down the cost of the tax. And here's why this is so important. Because when we can do more commercially in low Earth orbit where there is a marketplace, NASA can use its resources to go back to the moon and onto Mars. That's what we want to do. We want to do the things that nobody else is or will do. We want to do that moonshot. That's what we want to do. This time when we go to the moon, it's different than it was in the 1960s. And I think Professor Brinkley correctly identified one big difference this time. We have a very diverse, highly qualified astronaut corps that includes women. It's why we call it Artemis. In Greek mythology, Apollo had a twin sister. Her name was Artemis, and she was the goddess of the moon. And this time when we go to the moon, we go with a very diverse, highly qualified astronaut corps that includes women. I think it's a perfect story. 50 years after Apollo, and I want to take nothing away from Apollo. Back then, we chose our astronauts from our test pilots and our fighter pilots, and there were just no opportunities for women back then. But now there are. And we have this opportunity. I'll tell you who's most excited about this. My 11-year-old daughter. We want all of America to be able to see themselves having these opportunities. And that's why this is so important. So when we go back to the moon under the program we call Artemis, it's going to be different. A couple of other things that are different. When we go to the moon this time, we're going to have commercial partners that can help us drive down costs. We're going to have international partners, which is big. Every country on the Earth wants to be with us when we go to the moon. Countries that didn't have space agencies a year ago are now creating space agencies because they want to be with us when we go to the moon. And I know you mentioned that in the Apollo program we didn't do partnerships, and that's true for the large part. But all of those images of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon came through Canberra because of how the world was positioned. Canberra, of course, is Australia. Came through Australia, had a big network capability to bring down that data, bring down those images, and broadcast it for the entire world to see. If Australia wouldn't have been with us on that day, we wouldn't have had that amazing achievement. We would have had it, we just wouldn't have seen it. So we did have one partner, and of course that's fantastic. So when we think about the future, commercial partners, international partners, like I said, 15 nations on the ISS, that's the starting point. We want to grow from there. We want to make sure we keep that tool of diplomacy that is NASA as we go forward to the moon. The other big difference is we now know that there's hundreds of millions of tons of water ice on the south pole of the moon. Water ice, what does that mean? It's air to breathe, it's water to drink, it's rocket fuel. Hydrogen and oxygen is rocket fuel. By the way, Rice University story. I'm a brand new freshman at Rice University. Orientation week is over. I'm getting to know my roommate, who I love very much. I just had dinner with him in San Francisco a few weeks ago. Rice kid. He is a Rice kid through and through. One day he's at his desk and he's playing with a glass of water, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's got this all of these electronics on his desk. He had taken apart back then we had disposable cameras. I see everybody filming me with these cameras now, but we had disposable cameras back then. He took the flash out of a disposable camera, rigged up the capacitor to create electricity with a battery, and he was using the electricity with a glass of water. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he was like, I'm creating hydrogen and oxygen out of water. I'm like, wow, this is Rice University. Welcome to Rice, right? I will tell you, he was a great friend, a really smart guy. But here's the thing. hydrogen and oxygen is plentiful on the south pole of the moon. So when we go to the moon next time, within 5 years, by the way, by direction of the president, we will go within 5 years. There you go. When we go to the moon with the next man and the first woman, and by the way, there's no reason it couldn't be 2 women, it may very well be, but with at least the next man and the first woman, when we go to the moon, we will be going to the south pole of the moon, and we will be using that water ice. And we right now have underway what we call CLPS missions, Commercial Lunar Payload Services. We're going to the moon commercially with these small robotic missions to characterize, understand the water ice and the regolith, use it for life support, use it for rocket fuel, hydrogen and oxygen, same rocket fuel that powered the space shuttle, same rocket fuel that powered the Saturn rockets that took us to the moon the first time. It's available, hundreds of millions of tons on the South Pole, and likely a lot more. So we're going to use that resource. And here's why, because we're going to go to Mars. And I know we're running out of time. I'm going to be quick. I got to talk for a second about Mars. We're going to show a 2-minute video. Why does Mars matter so much? We go to the moon because we need to get to Mars. Then it was the destination. The problem is Apollo ended. Artemis, we do not want it to end. We're going sustainably to the moon. We're building reusability into the architecture, sustainable to the moon, so that my children and their children will continue to see missions on the surface of the moon. And the reason is the moon is the waypoint for the destination, which is Mars. Challenge with Mars. We are on the same side of the sun once every 26 months. When you go to Mars, you got to be willing to stay because you will not be in the same orbit as the Earth. The moon is with the Earth wherever we go. It's the proving ground. It's a 3-day journey home. Apollo 13 taught us that we can have a problem and still make it home. Houston, we have a problem. We're in Houston. Apollo 13 taught us that things can go wrong at the moon and you can still make it home. If you do that on the way to Mars, it's not going to be a good day. So we need to learn how to live and work on another world for long periods of time so we can go to Mars. Here's why Mars matters. In the last year, we have discovered complex organic compounds on the surface of Mars. The building blocks for life exist all over the surface of Mars. They don't exist on the moon at all, 0 on the moon, but they are all over the surface of Mars. We have now found that the methane cycles on Mars are commensurate with the seasons of Mars. It doesn't guarantee life. It could be geological in nature, but the probability of finding life on another world just went up. And oh, by the way, we have now seen massive plumes coming from Mars that were unpredicted before, massive plumes of methane. And of course, methane is one of those complex organic compounds. Finally, and this is important, within the last year, we have found water, liquid water. We knew that Mars had an ice cap. We knew that Mars had water ice under its surface, even at the equatorial regions. We now have found liquid water 12 kilometers under the surface of Mars. What does that mean? Everywhere there is water on Earth, there is life. Is that true on Mars? I don't know, but we should find out. Going back to these elements of national power, I would attest this. Just like John F. Kennedy said, you know, we want to make sure that it's an American flag on the moon, not a Soviet flag on the moon. When we find life on another world, and I want to be clear, I don't know that it's there, and as the head of a science agency, I'm not making any declarations. But should life be found on another world, and the probability is getting higher, should life be found on another world, I believe it should be the United States of America that finds it, because it will rewrite for all time history books and science books. And by the way, when we find it, we should find it with a coalition of international partners that are collaborating on such a stunning, stunning achievement. So we're going to watch a video about the Artemis program. It's just a few short minutes in length, and it will show you kind of what we are putting together. Can we
50 years ago, we pioneered a path to the moon. A trail we blazed, cut through the fictions of science, and showed us all what was possible.
It's very pretty out here.
Today, our calling to explore is even greater. To go farther, we must be able to sustain missions of greater distance and duration. We must use the resources we find at our destinations. We must overcome radiation, isolation, gravity, and extreme environments like never before. These are the challenges we face to push the bounds of humanity. We're going to the moon to stay by 2024. And this is how.
This all starts with the ability to get larger, heavier payloads off planet and beyond Earth's gravity.
For this, we designed an entirely new rocket.
The Space Launch System. SLS will be the most powerful rocket ever developed.
And with components in production
and more in testing,
this system is capable of being the catalyst for deep space missions.
We need a capsule
that can support humans from launch
through deep space and return safely back to Earth.
For this, we've built Orion.
This is NASA's next-generation human space capsule.
Using data from lunar orbiters that continue to reveal the moon's hazards and resources,
we're currently developing an entirely new approach to landing and operating on the moon.
Using our commercial partners to deliver science instruments and robotics to the surface, we are paving the way for human missions in 2024.
Our charge is to go quickly and to stay, to press our collective efforts forward with a fervor that will see us return to the moon in a manner that is wholly different than 50 years ago.
We want lunar landers that are reusable,
that can land anywhere on the lunar surface. The simplest way to do so is to give them a platform in orbit around the moon from which to transition.
An orbiting platform to host deep space experiments and be a waypoint for human capsules. We call this lunar outpost Gateway.
The beauty of the Gateway is that it can be moved between orbits.
It will balance between the Earth and Moon's gravity,
in a position that is ideal for launching even deeper space missions.
In 2009, we learned that the moon contains millions of tons of water ice.
This ice can be extracted and purified for water. It can be separated in oxygen for breathing or hydrogen for rocket fuel.
The moon is quite uniquely suited
to prepare us and propel us to Mars and beyond.
This is what we are building.
This is what we're training for.
This we can replicate throughout the solar system.
This is the next chapter of human space exploration.
Humans are the most fragile element of this entire endeavor, and yet we go for humanity. We go to the moon and on to Mars to seek knowledge and understanding and to share it with all. We go knowing our efforts will create opportunities that cannot be foreseen. We go because we are destined to explore and see it with our own eyes. We turn towards the moon now, not as a conclusion, but as preparation, as a checkpoint toward all that lies beyond. Our greatest adventures remain ahead of us. We are going.
We're going.
We are going.
We are going. We're going.
So finally, well, come on up, come on. So finally, I just want to say in closing here, and this is important. I mentioned how space exploration transcends geopolitics. It's a tool of information power, but more than anything, it's a tool of diplomacy. And countries that disagree on Earth, we can collaborate and work together in exploration. I will also say this, and this is so important. Just like it was in the 1960s, we have to make sure that this is not partisan, that it is not political. And when I was first nominated, and yes, there were concerns because I came from the House of Representatives, people seem to think that we would run it in a partisan way. We are working very hard to make this apolitical, bipartisan. We have had a lot of bipartisan support. The other day, I was out at the Ames Research Center with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, the very first woman Speaker of the House, and I will tell you she is enthused about making sure that we have women on the moon. She is enthused about that. She supports the program. We are building that coalition of bipartisan, apolitical support, so this can be a multi-generational effort, which we cannot understate the importance of. Finally, beat Texas.
So I know we're running a little bit late, and you've probably got a million questions, but I'm willing to take one or two quick questions if somebody would like to come up to the mic. And if there's a second question, or maybe head your way over to the other mic to keep it speed. Please, sir.
We were in Aspen at a security conference that was sponsored in Aspen, and we sat in on a session about military and space. How does, and we were never aware of what is going on with China and Russia and how they seem to be trying to interfere with our space technology, which is the best in the world.
Yeah.
How does that impact, does it impact what you're doing at NASA?
Yeah, so it's important. I get this question a lot as the NASA administrator. We don't do national security or defense at NASA. We are a science exploration agency. But I will say, and this is a challenge. Space is becoming very dangerous, and here's the challenge. And Professor Brinkley mentioned GPS and some other technologies. Think about how dependent we are on space. You know, I see these TV cameras on. Many people may watch this on the internet. Well, if you come from rural Oklahoma, you get your internet via internet broadband from space. A lot of people watch DirecTV or Dish Network. Again, space-based communications have transformed the world and continue to transform. That's just communication. GPS, the way we navigate, dependent now on space. And by the way, that GPS signal is critical. Every banking transaction in the United States of America is dependent on a timing signal from GPS. If there is no GPS, there is no banking. No milk in the grocery store within 3 days. Bad day for the United States of America. When we think about the GPS time, it regulates the flows of data on terrestrial wireless networks. No GPS, no terrestrial wireless networks. It regulates the flows of electricity on the power grid. Talk about a bad day for America. No GPS, no power grid. It would be devastating for our country. It becomes existential. China has called space the American Achilles heel. That's a problem. And I think it's important that this country understand that we cannot allow anybody to hold our way of life hostage because they're willing to destroy space. Now, NASA has a stake in this for really one reason. We do exploration, and if you destroy space, which, by the way, low Earth orbit, you got to get through low Earth orbit to go anywhere else. But if you destroy space, you have damaged permanently what NASA is trying to achieve. When I was in the House of Representatives, we had a national defense, I was on the Armed Services Committee. We had a National Defense Authorization Act that included a Space Force. This was 2017. No, actually it was even before that. I don't know, I have to go back and look. But when we passed it, it got 344 votes in the House of Representatives. Bipartisan. We don't get many votes that have 344 unless you're naming a post office or something. 344 votes in the U.S. House of Representatives. And it went to the Senate, and there it did not succeed. Again, the goal here is nobody wants war. I don't want it. Nobody wants it. But what we have to do is we have to make sure that the adversaries of the United States or the potential adversaries of the United States understand they will receive no advantage by making those investments. That's the key. That's what the U.S. Space Command, which was recently announced under Goldwater Nichols, that can be created by the President through the Secretary of Defense without any authorization from Congress. But that is just about fighting and winning wars, which is what a combatant command is about, joint command. There's an entirely separate element, which is how do you organize, train, and equip a cadre of professionals to do that fighting. That's what a military service is. To create that new military service, the Space Force, requires a vote in Congress. We had that vote in the House. It has since not passed. I will tell you, in the House, they have passed the Space Force. By the way, it's still bipartisan and strong bipartisan. They have had that vote in the House. It passed in the National Defense Authorization Act. And in the Senate, they have marked up an NDAA that includes a Space Force. And they did that in committee, but it hasn't gotten a vote of the full Senate. But it's not partisan, and it's important, and the goal here is to prevent war, not create war.
President, thank you very much for your service, and thank you for being an excellent NASA administrator. My name is Keisha. I wanted to let you know that I have been a very strong proponent of the space program. I wrote a report on behalf of the National LaRouche organization. And what we're doing right now is we're circulating a petition in support of President Trump's Artemis Program, and we're getting quite a bit of support on campuses across the nation and internationally.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, so, and I'll give you a copy of that report before we leave here. But
let me know what I can do to help.
Yes, thank
and
you.
I'm being serious, yeah.
And my question to you is on the subject of not just supporting the next 4 years of 2024, but looking into the next 50 years of space exploration. You talked about the Mars mission. If we're going to send human beings to Mars, it can't be take your time and let's do this.
You're right.
You know, getting people there in 9 months. And there's discussion that's coming up right now on the question of fusion propulsion.
Oh, yeah.
So I want you to speak on that, because the importance of this right now is, you know, how can we actually get human beings to Mars safely, efficiently, through 1G acceleration, through advancing, maybe instead of 3 months, going there in less than a few weeks here.
Fantastic.
And I think that's a very important subject. Even the Russians are talking about the importance of fusion, and many countries are looking to the moon as the basis for that, particularly on the mining of helium-3. So I'd like your comments on that, please.
My goodness, there's a lot in there. Keisha, thank you for your advocacy. And thank you for wearing that shirt. Keep doing that. Yes, a couple of things. You mentioned 2024, and you know, some people have said maybe that's a partisan date. Remember what Kennedy said. By the end of the decade, he gave it a date. Why? Because that's how you get results. And it's important that in this particular case, when we look at why we compressed the timeline. Originally, it was 2028, based on traditional budgets. The president said that's not good enough, so he said accelerate it. We did. He helped us with additional budget in the budget request. We did an amendment. We got that amendment over to the Hill. But here's the important thing. NASA has not a science problem or a technical problem. We can retire all of the technical risk you can imagine. We're an amazing agency with amazing engineers. We have a political problem. That's why we're not on the moon right now. That's why we're not at Mars right now. And Representative, or I should say, Professor Brinkley has been very, very clear about why Kennedy was successful. It was bipartisan, and he gave it a deadline, and he moved fast. There was a race. So when a program goes 15 years, 20 years, and costs billions of dollars, and people aren't seeing results, that's when they get canceled. When we cannibalize the Science Mission Directorate to fund human exploration, that's when it creates a partisan fight. When we cannibalize the International Space Station to fund deeper space exploration, we create a parochial fight. And I'm saying that because the Texas delegation is sitting right here in front of me. So these are all things that we have a political science problem at NASA historically. I've been very clear. My objective is to fix that, and I've been working on it since the day I got in this office. That being said, fusion, you said fusion. We're not there on fusion. That's going to take a number of years. For people in the room that might not be aware, fusion, of course, is taking two nuclei and pushing them together, and basically it's how you get energy out of the sun. And of course, the release of energy is massive. Fission is actually nuclei breaking apart. Fission, I think, is in the short term. How do we do nuclear propulsion? It's going to be necessary to go to Mars. Radiation in deep space is harsh on the human condition. If instead of a 7 to 9 month journey, we can make it a 2 to 3 month journey, it's really good for the medical condition of the astronauts. I will also say that we can do it so safely that we can do it in a way that it could never be weaponized. And certainly we don't want that, and we would never allow that to happen as an agency. But I will say other countries do it. Other countries are developing that technology right now, and we should be a part of it. But cislunar space, when you talk about having nuclear propulsion in space, being able to maneuver in cislunar, basically the space between the Earth and the Moon, is going to be critical for the future. From a national security perspective, for all kinds of reasons that I'm not going to talk about here, but at the end of the day, that's a technology that the DoD is interested in. There's no reason, if the DoD is developing it, that we shouldn't take advantage of it for exploration, and it's important. So anyway, thank you all so much.